Software testing is the only reason your favorite apps don't randomly crash anymore. Today, one broken page or one tiny login bug is a death sentence for your product or your resume. So we test. But writing tests is excruciating. We check every element, we validate input, we test edge cases, and that's before we even know if the whole thing works. So if it sounds like mountains of work for a tiny app, imagine testing something the size of Amazon, Instagram, or ChatGPT. Who has time for that? So today, we're going to see if AI can actually take some of this work off our plate. We will use an agent called KaneAI, and we will walk through a few real testing scenarios, starting with a simple example, then moving on to a real application with actual bugs in the API, and then finally letting AI generate its own test scenarios. And trust me, you want to stay until the very end for this one. So if you're curious to see how AI fits into modern testing workflows, let's roll. Okay, so let's start with a quick demo. We will head over to KaneAI. You can find the link in the description or the pinned comment. You can, of course, start with a free trial and then upgrade later if you find it useful. Now, the main idea here is pretty simple. We are testing a live application using natural language. And first, we will use the quick author mode, saving the generate scenarios one for later because this one is extra impressive. So instead of writing code, we'll just describe what we would like to test. For example, I will type subscribe to the newsletter at pythonsimplified.org. And then KaneAI will generate a test case, planning a sequence of steps, and it will actually run those steps in the browser just like we would with Selenium. In our case, it created 5 steps. First, it opens the website. Then it finds the email input and types a value. Next, it clicks the subscribe button. After that, it checks if some kind of a confirmation appears. And then finally, it verifies that this element is actually visible, which is the part we are really testing. When we assert something, we're basically checking if something is true. Everything before that is just setup and interaction. The assertion is what actually determines whether the test passes or fails. And this is where things get interesting. If we expand some of these steps, we will see a fail test immediately flag. These aren't assertions. They're more like guard conditions. They can stop the test before we even reach the final check. So if we recreate the same flow with Selenium and Unittests, I have great tutorials for both. The structure looks very similar. Each step depends on the previous one. So if we cannot type an input, there is no point in clicking the subscribe button. And these flags, they stop the script from running as soon as something breaks. Perfect. So now that we understand the basics, let's move on with something a bit more realistic. Let's say we're running a simple warehouse ordering system. There is a backend API that manages the inventory and a public interface where users can place orders. We actually built this system together in a previous API tutorial, but I slightly enhanced it for this demo. The important part is this is a live system. If you type this IP address in your browser, you will be able to interact with it yourself. And I highly recommend following along. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. I have intentionally embedded small logic flows into the system so you can try to catch them. First, we are allowed to order negative quantities. And second, the inventory never actually reaches 0, okay? It is fine with keeping one box or bottle or loaf, but it will not let you order it. So let's quickly reset the inventory. Okay, I will do this from my server. And then back in KaneAI, we will ask it for several things. First, open the app and test the tomato inventory. Then make sure we cannot order more tomatoes than what's available. Next, check that valid quantities work as expected, and then finally try to reduce the inventory all the way to 0, which we already know is going to be a problem. Now let's hit enter, and perfect. KaneAI broke it down into logical steps. And since they all look good to me, I will hit approve, and then the browser automation will begin. Now, since there were a few shenanigans involved in securing my app, we are initially dealing with a warning page. But once KaneAI figures it out, we can proceed with the tests. And this has to do with ngrok, so if you're curious to find out more about it, I explained it in the pinned comment right below. This is my shenanigan. So when we look at the automation, we see that it checks the inventory. Great. It tries to order more than available, but it gets blocked. Amazing. Then it places a valid order. Also good. And then finally, it tries to reach 0, which is exactly where we expect things to break. But instead of failing the test, it actually gets stuck in a loop and it repeats the same steps over and over again without making any progress. So this is where we step in. We will pause the execution, we will stop that last test, and we will click on the More Options button, editing the objective. To clarify our instructions, we will go ahead and type check tomato inventory. Test that I am allowed to order the remaining quantity. If I am not allowed to, fail the test. Now we will go ahead and apply that change and we will run the test from this point. There's no need to rerun everything from scratch. And now this time, instead of looping, we get a clean conditional flow that behaves the way we expect. Now, once everything is done, we can go ahead and save the test as well as validate the generated code. And now that the session is done and we're no longer racing the clock, we can go ahead and inspect what KaneAI actually produced. We can have a quick peek at the code, and even though it is still being validated on my end, we can already download it and open it on our system. And perfect! We see familiar Selenium imports and a full test script generated directly from our prompt. Yay! But sometimes it's easier to just click around and enter values instead of trying to describe it. And for this, we have the manual interaction feature. So if we go back to our test summary, we can click on the Edit Steps button and we will add another check to our logic. We will replay the existing test. And once we reach the very end, we will switch to the manual interaction mode at the top right of the automation browser. Then we will go back to the main page and we'll try to order a quantity of -20 tomatoes and we'll hit send. And okay, we see that instead of getting an error, we are actually adding 20 boxes of tomatoes to our inventory, which is a very big no-no. So what we will do is we will turn off the manual interaction. We will go to the last step in our workflow, we will expand it and click on the 3 dots. Then we will set a failure condition of fail test immediately. Meaning, if somebody tries to order a negative quantity, they should not be allowed to hit send. And this is how we add steps manually. Additionally, we can test the API that serves all these inventory values. And if we're already talking about tomatoes, we might as well focus on the tomatoes endpoint. Specifically, since it accepts an order quantity parameter, we can test how this request is processed. So let's go ahead and copy the URL and we'll head back to our test environment. We will then type / and we will choose add an API. We will then, of course, paste the URL right over here. And then under query parameters, we will add a key of order quantity, also giving it a value of 10. Then we will hit send. And in our new API step, we can double check that by clicking on Show API and then inspecting the response. We can see that we ordered 10 boxes of tomatoes and that the remaining quantity dropped from 1,000 to 990, which tells us that the backend logic is working here, not just the UI. We do have issues elsewhere, but this specific API request is fine. Perfect. So now we can go ahead and save everything once again, but it doesn't mean that our previous version is lost. We can access it by clicking on the version history tab where we store both the current version of our tests and all the previous ones. So if you mess something up and you want to go back, you can just select one of the earliest versions, only one in our case, and then we click on revert. I am not going to do that on my end, but the option is here. Now, what we've seen so far was mainly a demo of the core features, and we didn't follow the step-by-step testing process that I've shown you in previous videos. Normally, we will go through a proper checklist, testing things like existence, typical inputs, outputs, and edge cases, and so on. But the cool part is that AI can actually generate and adapt this checklist based on the app you're building. So instead of using the same approach every single time, these scenarios are tailored to your specific app and your specific software stack. So now the creme de la creme, which I've saved for last, is the generate scenarios mode. Instead of following your instructions, KaneAI will analyze your app and generate its own tests. It is designed to check for scenarios that you probably wouldn't even think of. So let's switch to generate scenarios and let's give it a prompt to analyze our warehouse app. And I gave it both the ngrok URL as well as my server's IP. Now, after a few moments, we get a set of generated scenarios with different priorities. Some are must-haves and others are should-haves. And this is actually important because if you are using the free trial, like I am, you're limited to 10 scenarios, while KaneAI is suggesting 15 of them. So you can just go in, you can expand these scenarios, and you can manually disable some of the tests. And that way you control how many sessions you use. But on my end, I'm just gonna click on create and automate and let's see what happens. And okay, it asks for a URL again, so I will just paste it. And once I confirm, I get a warning about the session limit, which is fair. But even with this warning, as you can see, we immediately start executing our first test. And at the same time, okay, we now have a full queue of tests waiting to run. And these should match all the scenarios that we just approved. Now, the idea behind this feature is that the test can run in the background while you are doing some other work. But if you want to jump in and just watch one of them, you can just click on View Session, and then it will take you back to the same interface we used earlier, automating the app in the browser. Otherwise, when each test finishes, the next one starts immediately, and the queue gets gradually smaller. And ideally, instead of running these tests one by one, you would run them in parallel, using multiple agents depending on what you have available. I believe we have 2 of them available in the demo. So if you found this workflow interesting, make sure to check out KaneAI using my link from the description. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what you think about it and what kind of projects you would like to use it for. And thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please share it with the world. And don't forget to leave it a huge thumbs up and all kinds of comments. Now, if you'd like to see more videos of this kind, you can always subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell. I will see you soon in an awesome tutorial. And in the meantime, bye-bye.